for allowing me to speak with you about the opioid epidemic. We hear about it in the news and read in our newspapers almost every day. The title of this talk is The Rise and Fall of the Opioid Epidemic. And the goals are to review the history of opium and opioids, to learn the causes of today's opioid epidemic, to understand the role of prescribers like myself, patients and healthcare providers like yourselves, and learn how each of us can do our part to end this deadly epidemic. So first, I want to just open it up to you. Who here has personally known someone, not just a patient, with some sort of opioid problem, abuse, dependence, addiction, frequent ER visits, rehab, overdoses, or death? Yes? Most of the people here. And I give talks around the state, and generally when I ask that question of audiences, about 2/3 to 3/4 of the people raise their hands. So most of the people in Connecticut have some direct experience with someone they know involved in this epidemic. When we look at drug overdose deaths in the United States, in 1990, before there was an opioid epidemic, there were 9,000 deaths that year. 10 years later, there had almost doubled to 17,000, and by 2010, 10 years later, it had more than doubled to 38,000. In 2015, it had been up to 52,000, and last year, it increased by 23%, was up to 64,000. And about 75% of those drug overdose deaths involve opioids, either legally prescribed opioids or illegal opioids, such as heroin and fentanyl. In fact, drug overdose deaths now are the #1 cause of death in the United States between the ages of 15 and 50. If you take that 64,000 death number last year, you can compare it to other major causes of death. If we look at the total number of Americans who died during the 11 years of the Vietnam War, that was 58,000. The number of motor vehicle accident deaths last year were 40,000. The number of HIV deaths in the peak year of the HIV epidemic was 47,000. And the number of firearm deaths in the peak year of firearm deaths in 93 was 39,000. Coming to Connecticut, last year there were 306 people that died in motor vehicle accidents, and 3 times that number that died from drug overdose deaths. So if you're a parent like I am and you've got kids that are either starting to drive or beginning or have been driving for a short time, we're certainly all worried about our kids' danger on the road. The unfortunate thing is they're actually 3 times more likely to die in their lifetimes in Connecticut from drug overdoses than compared to motor vehicle accidents. And whereas when I started emergency medicine, the people that were dying of drug overdoses were coming from the inner city, and they were usually dying from heroin overdoses, and were usually people of color. Today, 75% of the Connecticut deaths are Caucasians, and it's affecting people in every town, city, large and small, in the state of Connecticut, and in the country as well. Coming back to Connecticut, 306 motor vehicle accident deaths last year, 3 times that number of drug overdose deaths. The number of drug overdose deaths increased 150%, not 50%, but 150% in 4 years. And 80% of those deaths involved opioids, the majority of heroin with or without fentanyl. And again, most were white and also most were male. This is a picture of a opium poppy field with a farmer, probably in Afghanistan. And in the upper right-hand corner of the slide is a close-up of the heroin poppy bulb. And at a certain stage of the poppy's development, the farmers make shallow slits on the outside of the poppy. And the poppies then secrete this thick, white, milky substance, which is called latex. And that latex, which they harvest, contains about 12% morphine. It also contains another drug called thebaine, which is the substrate, that and morphine are the substrate for most of the opioids that we're going to talk about today. Now let's talk a little bit about the history of opioids. As early as 4000 BC, we know they were cultivated and used for things such as treating pain, calming irritable infants, suppressing coughs, treating diarrhea, and for use as a tranquilizer. And opium was used recreationally as early as the 1300s in the Ottoman Empire, which is essentially the modern Middle East today. And in the 1600s in China, it was widely used, and it was mixed with tobacco and then smoked in long stem pipes because it's better absorbed when it's smoked through the lungs than when it's absorbed through the GI tract. And that's when addiction was first recognized and described. In 1729, it was such a problem that opium was outlawed in China. In the 1800s, the English, who had colonized India, were making a lot of money importing Indian opium into China. The Chinese government wanted to stop that. There were actually 2 wars fought between England and China, known as the Opium Wars. And England won both of those wars. And the result was that unrestricted importing of Indian opium into China continued. The result of that was that opium use became even more widespread in China. By 1905, about 25% of Chinese men were dependent and addicted to opium. This is a picture of an opium den. You can see these men are smoking from these long stem pipes. Again, they mix the opium with the tobacco and smoke it. Coming to the United States, opium and morphine were widely used during the Civil War for battlefield injuries. In fact, it's said that about 400,000 soldiers, both in the Confederate Army and the Union Army, became addicted to opium and morphine at the end of the war. Morphine addiction became known as a soldier's disease. In the late 1800s, Chinese immigrants began coming to the United States to work on the Transcontinental Railroad, to participate in the gold rush in California. They brought the love of opium with them, and opium dens began opening up in San Francisco and New York. In the 1870s, opium dens were outlawed. They went underground, but they actually persisted to some degree until about World War II in the United States. Now, from opium and the latex that we talked about, drug companies developed most of the opioids that we know and use today. Morphine in 1804, codeine in 1832, diacetylmorphine, which we know as the brand name heroin, in 1898, hydrocodone, which is the active opioid in Vicodin, in 1920, hydromorphone, the active, which we know as Dilaudid, in 1924, oxycodone, which is in Percocet, oxycodone, and OxyContin in 1927, and methadone in 1937. So let's talk a little bit about heroin. Again, the chemical name is diacetylmorphine. It was developed and patented by Bayer. And a Madison Avenue type marketing person came up with the great name of heroin, which sounds like heroic, in 1898. That's what we call it today. And believe it or not, it was marketed as a non-addicting treatment for morphine addiction. That sounds ridiculous, but we're going to see that pattern repeated about 80 years later with the drug that we know as OxyContin. In 1914, there were 200,000 heroin addicts in New York City. So there was an opioid epidemic from heroin back in 1914 when the Harrison Narcotics Act was passed, and that outlawed the non-medical, the recreational use of heroin. And 10 years later, heroin was outlawed in the United States for any use, including medical use. From the 1900s to the 1980s, opioids in the United States were prescribed only for acute and severe pain. They weren't used for chronic pain at all. And the vast majority of opioid addicts, again, were heroin addicts that were primarily in the inner cities. And the opioid epidemic that we hear about on a daily basis today did not exist. There was no opioid epidemic. So when did it start? It started in 1996. And the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration, gave approval to a pharmaceutical company called Purdue Pharmaceuticals for several of their drugs. In 1984, Contin, long-acting morphine, was approved for terminal cancer patients that were dying of cancer. In 1990, OxyContin, another Purdue drug, was approved also for terminal cancer pain, only for terminal cancer pain. So prior to 1996, opioids such as Contin, OxyContin, and others were only used chronically for patients that were dying of cancer. But in 1996, the FDA gave approval for Purdue to market OxyContin for patients with chronic non-cancer pain. And that, in my opinion, is the beginning of today's opioid epidemic. Now, Purdue was very advanced and aggressive in terms of their marketing to physicians and the public. And they began a campaign, well thought out and well orchestrated, convincing the public and the medical profession that in the United States, pain was undertreated. It was an undertreated pain movement. And OxyContin, believe it or not, just like heroin had been in 1898, was marketed as not addictive, under 1% addictive. There were no good published studies that showed that, and there still aren't. In 2007, Purdue pleaded guilty of falsely marketing OxyContin and ended ended up paying over $600 million fine for that. And today, this year, there are a number of states and some cities, including cities in Connecticut, that are suing Purdue Pharmaceuticals and other drug companies for falsely marketing OxyContin and other narcotics as being safe to take. So in 1996, the undertreated pain movement began in the United States with Purdue's aggressive marketing saying, number one, pain is undertreated, and number two, OxyContin is not addictive. Well, where did this claim come from that OxyContin is not addictive? Well, there was a letter to the editor in the New England Journal of Medicine by two physicians, and it stated basically that their experience, their anecdotal experience, patients that had been in the hospital and been treated with IV opioids had under a 1% chance of becoming addicted to those opioids. Now, there were never any good studies showing this. There still haven't been any good studies showing this. We know it's completely false. And yet that letter to the editor, which was simply an anecdotal report by two physicians, was only talking about people that had been hospitalized in opioids, was widely disseminated by Purdue Pharmaceuticals, and the medical profession and the public to some degree were educated incorrectly that opioids were safe to take and weren't addictive. In 2000, JACO mandated the use of the pain scale, which we all know is the fifth vital sign, the 0 to 10 question. And they mandated not only do we need to ask people if they have pain, what number is your pain, but the pain needed to be addressed in some way. Now, JACO never mandated that the pain needed to be treated with opioids. But again, the public and the medical profession and the nursing profession was educated that opioids were safe to give. And we needed to continue to treat that pain and address that pain until it was down to 0. So the expectation was now that any pain whatsoever, even a 1 or a half, had to be treated until we could get it down to 0. In the 2000s, there were patient satisfaction surveys such as Press-Ganey that came into widespread use. And one of those questions was, quote, did the provider adequately control your pain? And the scores of those surveys were shared with the providers in some hospitals and some emergency departments, mine included. Provider compensation was affected to some degree by patient satisfaction scores. And just last year, patient satisfaction became a hospital core measure, again tied into money that reimbursed to hospitals from Medicare and Medicaid. So over this period of time, over 20 years or so, first, everybody, including the medical profession, was incorrectly educated that pain was undertreated, that opioids were not addictive, that we needed to measure pain, we needed to give an objective number to pain as if it were an objective vital signs like the other core vital signs, and we needed to aggressively treat that pain until it was 0. And both doctors and hospitals were financially incented to treat that pain aggressively. The result was that we saw skyrocketing numbers of opioid prescriptions. That blue line is a 4-fold increase in opioid prescriptions over about 15 years, from 1999 to 2012, 13 years. And that red line is the number of deaths, overdose deaths, from prescription opioids. That's not total opioid deaths, that's deaths from prescription opioids. And you can see the two lines are roughly parallel. You can also see that around 2011, that the number of prescriptions and deaths peaked out and began going down. And they are continuing to go down to some degree. However, prescribing deaths, prescriptions are going down to some degree, but overdose deaths from total overdose deaths from all opioids is continuing to go up. Again, remember that red line is only deaths from prescription, legally prescribed opioids. Now, the United States, we're way off the bell curve. We have about 5% of the world's population, but believe it or not, we prescribe and consume about 8% of the world's prescription opioids. We prescribe more opioids per capita, far more opioids per capita, than any other country in the world. So this epidemic that we're talking about is not a worldwide epidemic. It's not a Western Hemisphere or even a North American epidemic. It's largely an American epidemic due to our overprescribing of opioids. So where do patients get their first exposure to opioids? Well, on the left, that large circle shows where people get their first exposure to opioids. And in the blue, it says, you may not be able to read it, that 54% of patients get their first opioid exposure free from a friend or relative. And in the lower left, about 15% of them either buy them or steal them from a friend or relative. So almost 70% of patients get their first opioids from opioids that were prescribed to another person, a friend or relative. Well, where does the friend or relative get their opioids? Well, about 82% of them get their first opioids prescribed by one doctor, which is the way if opioids are going to be prescribed, they should be prescribed only by one doctor, not by multiple providers. So although the friends or relatives are getting, most of them are getting the opioids appropriately, they have leftover pills. And those leftover pills are dangerous. They're like keeping a loaded gun unlocked in your house. And they can be either given away or stolen by someone else if you cause someone to get their first exposure to opioids. Well, who prescribes them? Well, in descending order of frequency, primary care providers over 50% of the total volume. In all fairness to primary care providers, they take care of the vast majority of people with chronic pain. There aren't nearly enough pain specialists in this country or this state to care for people with chronic pain. Followed by orthopedists, physiatrists, pain specialists, emergency physicians. We prescribe about 3% of total opioids. General surgeons, neurologists, and dentists. Now, prior to doing research on this topic, I was happy to blame the opioid epidemic on the dentists. But I found out that they only prescribe about 1 or 2% of total opioids in the country. However, they are the #1 prescriber of opioids to teenagers. Why is that? Wisdom teeth removal. And that frequently is where teenagers or young adults, people in their 20s, get their first exposure to opioids. And it's not an unusual story to hear someone that is now in rehab or addicted to heroin say that their first exposure to opioids was the Vicodin or Percocet that they got from their oral surgeon or their dentist. Dentists are now beginning to try to transition away from those opioids and using over-the-counter or NSAIDs. So we're now seeing a dramatic increase in deaths from heroin and fentanyl. Well, why is that? Well, chronic opioid therapy causes something called hyperesthesia. It actually causes chemical changes at the synapse of the brain where it causes someone to be more sensitive to pain than they were before they were on opioids. In other words, they experience more pain, more subject to pain from the same painful stimulus when they've been on chronic opioids. And that's because the opioids cause chemical changes at the synapse of the brain. So many people on opioids, not all, but many of them, in order to get the same relief, they need increasing doses for the same pain relief, or they get the same pain relief or the same euphoria or high. The result is that they go to their prescribers and request increasing doses or frequency of the opioids. Prescribers start getting nervous because of the obvious overdose problem and stop increasing the opioids or start tapering the patients down or even will cut them off if they feel the patients are being untruthful or diverting or selling the opioids. So the patients begin doctor shopping. They go to doctor, from doctor to doctor, from ER to ER, trying to get prescriptions for the opioids that they need or want. And if they can't get the opioids via prescriptions, they'll start buying them on the street. And people who are buying opioids illegally find out very, very quickly that by far the cheapest bang for the buck is heroin. So they will, once they start buying those opioids illegally, they're going to find very quickly that heroin is going to give them greater pain relief or euphoria with much less money. Heroin with or without fentanyl. So that results in dramatic increases in overdose deaths from heroin or fentanyl. This slide shows the blue bars are the dramatic increase in heroin overdose deaths that we've seen in the last 5 years in particular. The gold line is males and the yellow line is females. And this graph shows both heroin and fentanyl deaths dramatically increasing in recent years. Red is the fentanyl deaths, red is fentanyl deaths, and gold is the heroin deaths. Now this graph only goes up to 2014. If it went up to 2017, we'd see a dramatic increase in fentanyl, particularly in the last several years. That fentanyl line would be almost vertical. In fact, in the state of Connecticut this year, 61% of the overdose deaths are caused primarily by fentanyl. That's a dramatic increase from years in the past. So patients who are buying these drugs illegally are getting into stronger, more dangerous opioids. They don't know what they're buying. The old heroin used to come primarily from Colombia, was about 10% pure. The new heroin increasingly is coming from western Mexico, it's closer to 40% pure. Now fentanyl is actually not a natural opioid. It's not derived from the opium It's actually a synthetic opioid that's made in chemistry labs in the United States or other countries. And yet it hits the same receptors as the natural opioid, so it acts just like a natural opioid. Increasingly, it's being manufactured and smuggled into the United States from Mexico and China. It's 20 to 30 times the strength of heroin, and it's sometimes added to heroin, added to pills, or stamped into pills. So you've got an unknown amount of heroin that's being mixed into heroin or pills, and that is resulting in a high risk of overdoses. Now, we can compare strengths of opioids. We look at morphine as a gold standard for treating moderate to severe pain. We have a measure called an MME, or morphine milligram equivalent. And 1 MME is equal to the analgesic effect of 1 milligram of morphine. So by using MMEs, we can compare the strength of other opioids to morphine. So let's look at some of the opioids that we prescribe and use. Tramadol is about 1/10 the strength of morphine, milligram per milligram. Codeine is about 1/6. Morphine is about 1. Hydrocodone is equal to morphine in terms of its potency. And hydrocodone, again, is in Vicodin. But remember, 1 Vicodin pill has 5 milligrams of hydrocodone in it, so that's 5 MMEs. Oxycodone, which is in Percocet, is 50% stronger than Vicodin or morphine. So again, 1 Percocet pill has 5 milligrams of oxycodone, so that's going to have 7.5 MMEs. Heroin is 3 to 4 MMEs, and you can see how much stronger fentanyl is here, 20 to 30 times stronger even than heroin. The more MMEs per day, the greater the risk of addiction. If someone's taking under 30 MMEs per day, there's a fairly low risk. But when they get above 90, you get into a much higher risk. I take care of 1 patient that was on 720 MMEs per day, being prescribed by 1 primary care doctor who was not overdosing. She was actually in withdrawal because she had run out. But it's important to know that any MMEs per day, short-term or long-term, have some risk of leading to addiction. So how many MMEs per day do doctors prescribe? Well, if someone's getting Vicodin every 6 hours, or 4 a day, that's 20. If someone's getting 4 Percocet a day, that's 30. If I write a prescription, as I used to write 10 years ago, for 1 to 2 Vicodin every 4 to 6 hours, PR in pain, that's as many as 60. Dilaudid 4 milligrams every 4 to 72. If I write a prescription that I used to do for Percocet, 1 to 2 every 4 to 6 hours, PR in pain, that's up to 90. Oxycodone 10 every 4 hours is 90, and OxyContin 16 twice a day is 180. So you can see it's very, very easy with prescriptions that were very commonly written by doctors like myself in the past, that people can get into dangerous territory with the amount of MMEs, the amount of opioids that we're prescribing to patients, oftentimes with moderate pain and not severe pain, and oftentimes for days or weeks. So I look upon the opioid use as having 3 phases: the early, middle, and the late phase. The early phase is when someone's been taking opioids for under 1 week. The middle phase is 1 week to 3 months. And once someone's been taking the opioids for weeks to several months, they start oftentimes desiring greater pain relief or euphoria, leading to repeated chronic use. Again, because of the hyperesthesia, the chemical changes that occur in the synapse of the brain. And these repeated patients often are requesting increasing MMEs per day by either stronger pills or more frequency, and they're becoming increasingly dependent upon the opioids. In the late phase, which is 3 months and beyond, by this time the patients are probably dependent or addicted. And the difference between dependency and addiction, once someone's dependent upon a drug, if they stop the drug cold turkey, they have some withdrawal symptoms. So if I drink 6 cups of coffee a day and I stop cold turkey, I'm probably going to have some symptoms of withdrawal. So I mean, they say I'm dependent upon the coffee. Same thing with alcohol or benzodiazepines, certainly with opioids. Someone's addicted though, they have the physical symptoms of withdrawal, but they also are having to, the drug dependency is getting them into legal trouble. They're losing, or family trouble, their family life is falling apart, they can't hold a job, they're having to resort to criminal behavior to continue their habit. So these patients start prescription drugs, taking the doctor shopping or buying the opioids illegally, and that's when we see the escalating overdose deaths from either prescription opioids or illegal opioids. Now there's lots of attention given to the late phase of the opioid epidemic, when patients are already dependent or addicted, because addictions and deaths are headline grabbers. It's It's easy to sell newspapers when it's 20 overdose deaths in New Haven over the weekend and 4 or 5 people died. There's lots of media, government, and healthcare organizations' attention. There's more and more funding for treating addicts. The prescribers are beginning to get nervous and tapering or cutting off the opioids. Lots of methadone, Suboxone, buprenorphine are being prescribed to treat the opioid addiction. More and more ER visits, rehab programs, jails, overdose deaths, and morgues. Now, I'm not against the extra resources and attention we put into people that are dependent or addicted. That's necessary for those patients. However, there isn't enough attention being devoted to the first phase and the middle phase. In the early phase, again, when people are under 1 week of opioids, in the middle phase, from 1 week to 3 months. In these phases, this is where future opioid addicts are being made, even today as we speak. Now, this is a picture of a washroom with a sink that's overflowing from a faucet that's running, and a man and a woman furiously working to mop up the water from the floor. But they're not solving the problem, which is the faucet's running, and they're not turning off the faucet. To some degree, to a large degree in this country, we've been largely with the opioid epidemic mopping the floor, putting all of our resource and attention towards people that are already dependent, addicted, and overdosing. But we're not doing enough to turn off the faucet, which is the over-prescribing of opioids. We need to turn off the faucet. Believe it or not, about 80% of patients that are starting heroin today began using prescription opioids, legally prescribed prescription opioids. Usually those opioids were prescribed to another patient, a friend or a relative. Those leftover pills in the medicine cabinets, purses, and drawers are dangerous. Again, like leaving a loaded gun unlocked in the house. It's important that we realize that every opioid prescription, even for a few days, has some risk of leading to addiction. We need to educate providers and the public, and all healthcare providers like yourselves, that we need to minimize all opioids whenever possible. We need to dramatically reduce opioid prescribing. We need to go back to the levels of prescribing opioids before, in 1995, before there was the beginning of the opioid epidemic. And that's about an 80% reduction in what we're prescribing today. And if we don't dramatically reduce the number of opioids that are being prescribed, we're going to continue to create more new opioid addicts than our society has the resources to treat. We need to understand that the opioid faucet is the overprescribing opioids. And all of us, prescribers like myself, healthcare professionals like yourselves, and patients, lay people as well, have a role in controlling it. So what can we do? First thing is we want to recognize that opioids should only be prescribed for severe and acute pain, not mild or moderate pain. First question is, when someone has pain, is our medicines even necessary at all? Can we treat the pain without medicines? Ice, heat, elevation, ACE straps, stretching, physical therapy. If medicines are needed, we want to try non-opioid medications. To start with Tylenol, NSAIDs are good options. If someone gets a prescription, we want to know if the prescription contains opioids. Now, I've actually heard from patients and family members that a doctor either gave them a prescription or they were sent home from a nursing home with a prescription that contained opioids. And the patients and family members were never informed that the prescription contained opioids, and they only found out the hard way later. If opioids are needed for severe pain, we want to ask for low doses of the relatively weaker opioids, such as tramadol or Vicodin, not stronger opioid with more NMDs per day like Percocet and Vicodin. And we want to get a low number of pills, just 10 or 12 for 2 or 3 days, not 20, 30, 40, 50, or 60. Again, minimize the NMDs per day, minimize the days that people are taking opioids. Well, what else can we do? If someone is taking opioids, they need to understand, they need to be educated that if they are taking opioids, as soon as they no longer are using them, they should stop them as soon as possible and transition either to no meds at all or over-the-counter meds. And we need to do our part to educate all of our patients, particularly patients in nursing homes and going home from nursing homes, about the risks of addiction, particularly with teenagers or young adults. And when the opioids are no longer needed, we want to teach the patients and family members, and all of us should do the same, that we do not want those leftover opioid pills unlocked in our medicine cabinets or drawers or purses. We want to discard them, either the discard drawers in pharmacies or in the lobbies of police stations. And if someone is on opioids, we want them to avoid other medications that increase the risk of respiratory depression, overdose, benzos, sleep meds, alcohol included. Well, opioids for chronic pain, does it work? Well, it's very controversial. There are actually no good studies that show long-time improved pain scores with chronic opioids. Well, the reason for that is, again, the hyperesthesia. While patients are getting those long-term opioids, the chemical changes in the brain are making them increasingly sensitive to the same pain stimulus. But if opioids are needed for chronic pain, if the doctor and the patients feel that they're wise, we want to minimize the MMEs per day, again, to minimize the addiction risk. And we want to be sure to prescribe only by one prescriber, not by multiple prescribers. And if possible, we want the doctor and the patient to work together to try to gradually taper that patient down to get their MMEs per day as low as possible, hopefully completely off. And actually about 25% of the patients can be successfully transitioned down completely off opioids over a period of time, months, usually days. Well, can opioids be reduced? Well, in the United States, from 2010 to 2015, there was a 15% reduction in prescribing opioids, so that's good progress. But that's still 3 times the rate of opioid prescribing in 1999, that was at the relative beginning of the opioid epidemic, and it's 4 times the opioid prescribing rate in Europe. And actually, just a few weeks ago, I learned, actually from Governor Malloy, that from 2015 to 16, opioid prescribing in the United States in 1 year had dropped by 4%. Now that's going in the right direction, but it's way too slow. Too many people are still dying. We need to accelerate that pace. In our emergency department, the Hartford Hospital, and Hartford Hospital's EDs, we've been able to reduce our opioid prescribing by 50% in that 5-year period. We think we've got a lot further to go still. But the point is that all of us control the faucet, not just prescribers like myself, but healthcare professionals like yourselves, your friends, your family, your patients. We're all in this together. If we're going to end this opioid epidemic, all prescribers, healthcare workers, and patients need to understand and work together to dramatically reduce opioid prescribing. So you can make a difference. Let's work together to turn off the faucet. Thank you.